Letter 7. Megalopolis of the Occident, July 4th, 1873. In my predecessor lexiphonic communication, I gave you a compendious biographical sketch of Fritz and his amatorial experience. I now, wreathed on this, our national burial occasion, again bring into requisition my scaturient pen and plethoric cornucopia of arcane sesquipedalities, and essay to excogitate yet another euphuistic, cabalistical, epistolary effusion. But, being at present otherwise somewhat pragmatically engaged, I shall be necessarily more laconic. On a certain dominical day, recently, I repaired to a locality where audition was to be given to a certain ecclesiastic. The conflux was ample. The precentor or excenter of the quaestors inchoated the initial sonata with too much altitude of intonation, which produced considerable raucity in his guttural orifice before its termination, especially during the antiphon. Subsequent to this cantation there was a general taciturnity. This was broken by the orison of the Boanergian contunator. He was auricumus, and his countenance was saturnine. His aspect was juvenile, his corporeal structure was gracile, his nasal protrusion or olfactor possessed singular tenuity and cucuminated astoundingly. His theme was esperance. In his exordium or catastasis he was somewhat tranquil, but not didascalic. In a brevity of time, however, he became stenterophonic and spumous at his oral aperture. His sputations became frequent, and his palpable and ciliary organs gained indescribable celerity. His chironomy was violent and agonistic. Obstupefaction seized his sectators in view of his supposed polemothy. But his hermeneutical eclaircisement of his subject was cryptic, acataleptic, and hypothetical, as well as problematical and amphibological. His ambilogy, altiloquence, and largeloquence exsuscitated my erision. The eristical part of his homily was fraught with allergies and paralogies, and furnished an indubitable apodixis of his incipience in honourable polemics and homiletics. Towards dissentients he evinced such discourtesy and displacency as exacerbated my interior nature. When his course was zetetic, he propounded the most amphagorical and extraneous interrogations, and his responsions thereto were chimerical, catachrestical, and totally irrelevant. In his vociferations there was occasionally a subcutaneous dysphony, seldom euphony, but the most cruciating cacophony. As to his supernal enthusiasm, he laboured under a Muggletonian hallucination altogether. His Samosination had already transcended compendiosity, and yet he appended a platitudinous peroration, in which he primarily inveighed against Pyrrhonism, that is becoming so temerarious in this age, and after frowning it down by the torvity of his visage, he entered upon an inconsinous and very Aristarchian allocution to his sectators, in which he exprobrated their attrition and their want of contrition, and genuflection in their obtestations, and trenchantly, in very comminatory terms, vituperated their stultiloquence, adiaphorism, and their mutual obtractations, and by protracted tautophonies insisted on an auxesis of their foi, and an expurgation of their nefarious particularities and nefandous abominations by indesinant invocation. He depainted their multiform tentations, and gave them a callid hortation to the exercitation of esperance during the allotment of their sublunary vitality. They vaticinated that then, in their addition to the supernal world, they should be inenarrably felicitous. In his finale, he insisted on a collatitious operation throughout the assemblage for redemption of Theomachus and the ethnics to the fruition of ethical and theological cognoscence. And, after the adduction of pelf from our nummery receptacles, he prepared us, in a benedictory orison, for regression to our domiciliary tenements. On the succeeding matin, I set out for this metropolitan emporium or megalopolis of the Hesperian plateaus where I now temporarily abide. The matutine part of that day was characterized by all phases that possess puissance to impart satiety to the visual, auricular, and olfactory powers of our complex constitution. The reorient, exhortive solar luminary in his emanation or exurgence from the oriental margaric portals cast luculent, rayonant coruscations into the innubilous azure concavity, and his effulgent, candent ascension coerce the subterranean seminal and radical deposits to populate and diffuse vernal aridity over nature's undulating surface. The sylvan regions, or rather nemorous and arbuscular riparian boskages, were replete with the most mellifluent, canorous cantations of the pennated tenants of the aerial regions, the herbaceous, gramineous, and floriferous foliage having been humectated and made rorifluent by nocturnal irrorations, emitted the most grateful ambrosial redolence. My functions are now emperetical, amanuensical, and brachographical. I am quite negotiously engaged and somewhat a linknabite, as no laity to abide here coerces me, and moreover, since la remuda de pastos hace becerros gordos, I shall perhaps, during the autumnal season, resume my multivagous and mundivagant perorations, which may eventuate in my transfortation of the Pacific Ocean and circumnavigation of this terrene, till which time I shall remain your contemporaneous contemporary, Ivan. La critique est aisée et l'art est difficile.